Revelation chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20, if you keep up with the outline on back, then you will know that today is the beginning of the end of this long study we've had on sin. And I'm going to end it rather quickly. In fact, this week and next week should be it. I debated and prayed over going much more in depth on the next two things I'm going to mention, but have decided openly against doing so for no real reason. I just think it's what we ought to do. But it's sort of all downhill from here so far in this study over the past, 18, 19 months, really. We've seen what sin is, how it came into being, how it came to our lives, the consequences of it, the destructive nature of it in the world, what it holds for the future for those who are going to be punished for it. But starting today, we are going to watch it end. We're going to see the end of sin. There is coming a day in which sin will no longer exist at all anywhere in the universe. There is coming a day. I don't mean that eventually sin will be under control. I mean it will be like a unicorn. It will not exist anywhere in the universe. In fact, not even the desire to sin will exist. There will be no temptation to sin. There will be no unrighteousness, no lawlessness of any kind anywhere. But getting there is sort of a process. And that's what we're going to look at this week and next week. God will eventually bring an end to sin in the universe and in our lives or in our existences. And doing so in both of those places is according to a process. He's going to follow a process. And so what we want to look at today is how God will bring an end to sin in the universe. And then we'll next week plan to look at how he's going to bring an end to sin in our lives. Now, the first thing I want you to understand is, as I said, I'm going to just do 1 week on each of these and get out. So this is a real sort of what they call a 10,000 foot view. This is a flyover. Nearly everything I say this week and next week, you could devote a really long study to. But we're not going to do that. I just want to give you a sense of how this is all going to wind up. And you can pursue a study of it on your own. And so today let's look at how God plans to end or bring an end to sin in the universe. And he's going to do it, and this is my outline, and it's very simplistic and loose, so, right? But here's how he's going to do it. These are 3 points I'm going to make as we go through the day. He's going to begin by controlling it. That will be followed by destruction, which will be followed by recreation. And so those are the 3 things that we're going to look at today. Revelation chapter 20 is where we're going to be for the most part. 2 Peter chapter 3 right near the end. And let's go to our text, Revelation 20, beginning in verse 1. The Bible says this: "And then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of that dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be," that's important, "released for a little while." The first step that God is going to use to begin the process of destroying sin in the universe is through controlling it. There is coming in our future this 1,000-year period of history that is the most unique period of history in all of humankind. We commonly refer to that as the millennium or the millennial kingdom. We get that word, the word 1,000 means, or millennium means 1,000. And so in part we get that from this text. There is coming a 1,000-year period of near perfection on the earth in every conceivable way. And this period of time will be between the age in which we live now and between eternity. And so between what we have now and what we will have forever is this 1,000-year period, this unique period that we call the millennium. Now, in this 1,000 period of time is going to have several characteristics. All of creation will be renewed. Think of it as remodeled. perfect nearly, back to sort of Garden of Eden environmental living conditions, okay? There will be prosperity the world over. There will be peace the world over. There will be harmony the world over. Jesus himself will rule over the entire earth from the city of Jerusalem, right? And as we were told here in Revelation chapter 20, there will be no Satan to bother us for 1,000 years. And so what we have here is there are a couple reasons that this works so well. One is Christ ruling the world. Revelation chapter 2 and verse 7 says that during this period of time he will rule the world with a rod of iron. That is an ultimate, absolute, complete, indisputable authority. Jesus himself will be in control of everything in the world. The second thing is there won't be any Satan to cause trouble, right? And so the design of this, at least in part, is the control of sin. Imagine 1,000 years, living 1,000 years in a perfect environment where everyone enjoys complete prosperity, perfect equality, perfect justice, with no satanic influence. Sin will be completely under control for 1,000 years. Now it won't be gone, but it will be under control. There's a couple reasons we know it won't be gone. One thing is during that 1,000 years, death will still exist. Physical death. Physical death. In Isaiah chapter 65, he mentions that during that period of time, if a man dies at 100 years old, everybody will say, what a shame, he was just a baby. Because life will be extended, right, extraordinarily long. But if death exists, sin exists. Also, Zechariah chapter 14, there's an interesting passage that says every year all of the nations will be required to go to Jerusalem to honor the Lord, and if a nation does not do what they're told, they'll be punished. And so what we see is sin will still exist during the millennial kingdom, okay? But it will be virtually non-existent. It won't characterize the world like it does now. It won't characterize people's lives like it does now. But even with Christ himself ruling the world, some will still choose to sin during this period of time. It just won't be characteristic of life now. Right now, our life, everything in it, right? Sin characterizes everything about life in this world. That won't be true during that period of time. Now, part of the purpose of doing this is this. For 1,000 years, mankind will get to experience an existence that is all but completely free from the power and the consequence of sin. 1,000 years we will experience. Now we as saints, as I said, I don't want to get too deep into this. It's not the purpose, right? But as saints, we won't experience it at all. But mankind in general will experience this 1,000 year period of what it's like to not have sin be a real factor in your life or in the world, with everything around you perfect. In other words, you can think of it like this, that for 1,000 years, mankind will enjoy every blessing and goodness and all the prosperity they have ever imagined. And that is by design. God gives us a period of time in which sin is under control so much that it virtually doesn't exist. And we'll get to see what it's like to live a life free of sin. The problem is it doesn't last. And it can't last. Right? Because even though things will be much different, sin will be really under control, you're still ruling over a world of sinful men. And what's going to happen is that at the end of this 1,000 years, men are going to be forced to realize, you know what? Our problem wasn't environmental. It wasn't political. It wasn't financial. It's us. That's by design, because look what happens during step 2, Revelation chapter 20, verse 7. Now when the 1,000 years have expired, remember what I told you back there? He must be released. When the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose numbers is the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth, surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever. You want proof positive that sinners never change? After 1,000 years of perfect conditions in their lives, of people having literally everything they wanted, nearly, that they could ever have imagined wanting, and being perfect, virtually free from sin, under perfect leadership, experiencing untold blessings, the first opportunity man gets, the first opportunity, with little prompting, they all gather themselves together under the leadership of Satan to try and kill Jesus and destroy the saints again. This is their first act after the millennium. After those perfect 1,000 years of virtual sinlessness. In verse 9, we see God's response to this act. This is the part that's sort of want to focus on. They surrounded the breadth of they went up from the breadth of the earth, surrounded the camp of the saints of the beloved city, and look at this, second half of verse 9, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them all. That's it. We have seen in this study infinitely, right, how God deals with sin and how He's dealt with sin from the beginning and throughout the ages, and how He's still dealing with sin today. That's not how things are going to end. God's last dealing with sinners is going to be in this way, to absolutely destroy them all. Permanently, finally, and completely. Every living sinner, after the 1,000 years are finished, will be killed in one final act, in one moment, at one time, just destroyed. That's step 2 of the process of removing sin from the universe. Step 1 was controlling it. We'll control sin. As bad as it is now, it's sort of going to get worse. The society and the world in which we live now is on track to continue to just degenerate. But even now, sin is being controlled, right? It won't be until the day of the Lord, what we call the tribulation, that He's going to go hands off and just let sin go completely rampant. Even now, it's still being controlled, right? And so we have this process by which God will end sin in the universe slowly, first by controlling it, and then by just destroying everyone who's engaged in it. And that's what happens in Revelation 20 and verse 9. And look at verse 10. Satan himself, it says, is instantly thrown into the lake of fire, instantly thrown into torment. Notice that Satan doesn't get any sort of judgment. They're not going to recount Satan's works. Jesus said that Satan was already judged, John chapter 16. And when we get to verses 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, which we've already studied, this great white throne judgment, what we see is there are no sinners left alive. That after this final sort of gathering and battle, if you want to call it that, no sinners will be left alive. And so here's how the process works. Sin is controlled. Step 1. Step 2, sinners are destroyed. Right? By the time we get to the great white throne judgment, which is where, as we've seen, the lost are judged and taken from hell and put into the lake of fire, that's their eternal torment, there are no sinners left. After Revelation chapter 20 and verse 9, there are no sinners left. They have all been destroyed. They don't exist upon the earth. That's step 2 of ridding the universe of sin. Rid it completely of sinners. And so what's happened is, from the top down, beginning with Satan, all who rebel against God and all who offend and all who commit sin have now been done away with. And you get to Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through the end of the chapter, you see the great white throne judgment where they're all cast into eternal torment. And I love verse 14. It says that even death and hell will be cast into the lake of fire. My point, and I know I'm running through this fast, but that's okay because I just want to get to the point, and that is this. What is happening here in Revelation chapter 20 is a systematic eradication of sin. Right? That's essentially what's happening in Revelation chapter 20. From the top down, God is ridding the universe one step at a time from every trace of sin. And he first does it through control of sin, and then he does it through destruction of sinful people. And so that by the time we get to Revelation 21, there are no more sinners at all. They've all been destroyed. They've all been judged, including Satan, and they've all been put into eternal torment. And so there's a sense in which when you get to Revelation chapter 21, there is no more sin in the world, because there's no more sinners to commit it. Right? And those who are followers of Christ, well, we'll still exist, and we'll, still have physical bodies and all that. So, well, what about us? Well, that's next week. Right? But Revelation chapter 20 shows us the process, if you will, of the eradication of sin. The systematic eradication of sin. God, as I've said repeatedly, hates sin. It is the antithesis of everything he is, everything he does, everything he desires. And he considers sin and its effects his enemy. In fact, that's what I love. I think I made a reference in your notes, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 26. Paul said, the last enemy to be destroyed is death. We see here that John says even death was cast into the lake of fire. It's a systematic process of eradicating sin from the world. That's what takes place at the end. And that's for a reason. Here, at the end of all things, God finally does what he's really wanted to do with sin all the way from the garden, and that is to purge creation of its existence, to purge creation of its influence, and of every sinner who engages in it. And that leads us to the final step in the process of God ridding the entire universe of sin. You're going to find that step back in 2 Peter. Take a left. Let's go back to 2 Peter chapter 3. You just go to James, you've gone too far. Go to John, you haven't gone far enough. 2 Peter chapter 3. Let me show you how all this ends. God is going to destroy all sin in the universe. First by removing all sinners from existence, and then by recreating the universe in which sin was allowed to pass away. We're going to pick up our reading in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. And we've got 3 or 4 verses. Peter has been talking about false prophets in this chapter and prior to this. And he mentions one of the things that they engage in is this refusal to believe that Christ is going to return. And that's sort of where this happens. What we're going to read is in the context of that discussion. But let's look at what Peter says in chapter 3, beginning in verse 18. Verse 10. Let me find it myself. I need to get to chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10 regarding the day of the Lord. All right. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. Now look, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with a fervent heat, both the earth and the works that are in it, that is important, will be burned up. Therefore, since all these things will be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conduct and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because of which the heavens will be dissolved, being on fire, the elements will melt with a fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. You ever heard the phrase, well, the damage is done? Yeah, you've heard that. It applies to all sorts of things, right? You get a nice car and you wreck it and you have it repaired and you go to the dealership and they look up the wreck and they say, well, we can't give you as much, it's not worth as much as it was. And, well, you wrecked it. Well, I've completely fixed it. It looks brand new. Yeah, but the damage is done. One of the things that I hate to watch, you may have seen this occasionally, these videos or sometimes on the news, where they'll go into like a hotel room or a person's bathroom or a bedroom, and boy, it's nice and neat, smells good and looks clean, and they turn off the lights, turn on one of these special lights, right? You start seeing just how filthy and disgusting it really is, no matter how clean and perfect and pristine it looked. That's sort of what we're dealing with here, or the idea behind it, in what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3. the damage has been done. Right? The damage to this universe, this creation, has been done by sin, and you can't undo that damage. And it doesn't matter how well you clean it up, or how nice it looks, or how good you make it smell, or how much you've convinced itself that it's all clean and tidy, the stains remain, even if you can't see them. And that's what Peter is talking about here. It isn't enough for God to control sin in the world. He eventually has to destroy the source of it, sinners. And then it still doesn't go far enough to even do that. The damage is done. Even though sin has been eliminated and sinners have been abolished, every act and everything that was ever done in this current creation has been stained by sin. Peter alludes to that down in, verse about 12 and 13, where he says we have to look for this new heavens and this new earth in which dwells righteousness. We can't spend eternity, and God can't spend eternity in a universe that has even been stained by sin. The damage has been done, and God only deals with sin one way, completely. In a sin-stained universe, even if it's no longer inhabited by sinners, is not a fit place to be inhabited by a holy God or by His holy people. Look in that same chapter back in verse 6 and 7. Let me show you something interesting. Peter mentions before the text we read, he says, I want you to think back to Noah's day. And he compares it to our own. He says in verse 6 that the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. But look what he says in verse 7. The heavens and earth, which are now, are preserved by the same word, but are being reserved for fire until the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. What Peter is saying there is, the world, the creation that exists now, the only reason it still exists is because God's waiting to do away with it. Right? The same word that preserved the world prior to Noah and during Noah's flood is the only thing preserving us now. But it won't always preserve this creation. Look at what it says throughout our passage. Look in verse 10. It says that the heavens will pass away in verse 10. The elements will melt with a fervent heat. The earth and the works that are in it. That is very important because that's the stain I'm talking about, right? That even though all the sinners are gone and Satan is gone and we're all that's left and Jesus is present with us, there's a stain that remains on this creation. The works that were in it have to be done away with. It isn't a fit place to inhabit because of the stain of sin. Peter goes on, and I think it's interesting too, you look in verse 10, he says that the elements will melt with a fervent heat. You know what he's talking about there? The building, what we call the building blocks of creation. At the atomic level, the molecules themselves will be done away with because it's unfit. What's done is done. And this universe has suffered under sin so long that it cannot be allowed to remain. It's an unfit place. It will always be a garbage dump. Even if you remodel it, that's still just going to be what it is. And so God will have to completely recreate it. Jesus said it this way, Matthew 24:35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. It'll pass away. Psalm 102 says it like this, that heaven and earth will perish. 1 John chapter 2 says it like this world is passing away. And this is the final step in God ridding the universe of sin. First, control it. Second, destroy all those who engage in it so that there can't be any more acts of sin. But even that doesn't go far enough. What's finally going to happen is a complete destruction of and recreation of the thing that already exists, because it isn't a place fit to inhabit because of the stain of sin. The eradication of this universe will eventually be so complete that it will literally be purged on a molecular level. And the purpose of all this is found in verse 13. He says we are looking for a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. You've heard me say many, many times, and we may study it eventually, who knows, right? That heaven is not our eternal home. That's what we think, and we often say that stuff, and we use those terms synonymously. We're going to spend forever in heaven. No, we're not. We're going to spend forever in a city on the earth. It's just going to be a brand new earth. And it has to be because, love what Peter says here, in which righteousness dwells. We can't spend eternity as a holy people with a holy God in an old, used-up universe in which sin had sway for 20,000 years. It has ruined it beyond recognition. And even if he were to clean it up, the stains would still be there if we didn't see them, or, even if we didn't see them. And that's not a fit place for God to dwell. It's not a fit place for us to dwell. And so his final step in eradicating the universe of sin is to recreate the universe. And we will spend our eternity in this creation in which only righteousness dwells. And only righteousness has ever dwelt and will ever dwell. That will never again be touched by the stain of sin. And it is at that point that sin will be eradicated from the universe. When the last vestige of it, the stains left on it by us, are themselves destroyed. Real quick, and we're going to actually end here. I didn't plan to do this. That's okay. Let's go to Revelation 21. Real quick. One verse, and it crossed my mind. I wanted to share it with you and make a comment or two. Revelation chapter 21. It's not on your outline, so you can write it down if you'd like to reference it later. Verse 2, and I think there's another one, verse 20. We'll look at that. John says this in Revelation 21. He says, "Then I, John, I saw the holy city of New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. This is our eternal dwelling place, but I want you to notice the language that John uses in referring to this, especially in light of what we've seen about how everything else is going to be destroyed. He compares the place we're going to actually spend forever, right, this new creation, he compares it to a bride adorned for her husband. Now, in John's day, it was very important that a bride be a virgin. It ought to be very important in our day, but it is what it is, right? But in John's day, it was unthinkable that she not be. Because a woman who was being given in marriage to a man would be considered ruined were she not a virgin. She, in their culture especially, Hebrew culture especially, would be considered irrevocably stained and not fit to have. And so I love this language here, how John describes God's recreation as like a bride being prepared for her husband. It's completely pure. It's never been touched. It's untouched by sin. It's unstained by sin. It's unstained by holiness. And if you look in verse 27, he says it always will be. In that same chapter he said, "There shall by no means enter it anything that defiles or causes abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life." And this is why he has to do it this way. It's what he has to do it this way. And so eventually sin will not exist at all. It won't just be under control. It won't exist. It won't exist in the lives of the people of God, and it won't even exist in the sand and the rain and the trees of the universe in which we inhabit. And it can't, because only a universe untouched by sin is a fit place for the holiness of God and the holiness of his people. And so you see that it is necessary that God eventually destroys all sin in the universe. And he will. Now, part 2 of this, which will be next, will be, what about us? Right? We're going to exist there. Doesn't that cause a problem? Not by the time we get there. Why? That's what I'm going to try and show you next week. God's going to eradicate sin in us too. You know when that starts? What ought to have already started if you claim the name of Christ. and we're gonna see that next week, but we're also gonna see the blessed hope of how it ends when he finally does away with it for every single one of us. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, we